During Easter dinner, my daughter-in-law pointed at my late wife's bedroom and said, "My parents are moving into that room tonight." I looked at her and replied, "That room belongs to my wife. No one will ever live there." She grabbed the phone my son had given me for Christmas and hurled it at my head. As I staggered back, my son whispered, "Dad, tell the police it was an accident." I smiled, called 911 myself, and the moment I was in the ambulance, I called my lawyer. "Meet me at the hospital. Bring the files. It's time." This is a story about patience, evidence, and the long game. Before we begin, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between quick anger and patient justice? Drop A or B in the comments. Your answer might surprise you. Quick note, some details here are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection, but the core message is what truly matters. I am Vernon Ashford, 70 years old, and the smartphone that split my forehead open on Easter Sunday was the same phone my son gave me last Christmas. The dining room smelled like roasted lamb and rosemary scents that should have meant family and warmth. I had built the oak table myself over the years, when my wife was still alive, cutting and sanding every plank by hand. That Sunday evening, April 9th, 2023, I sat at the head of that table watching my son Brent, 38 years old, and vice president of the construction company I founded, push lamb around his plate with the distracted air of a man with problems he was not sharing. Across from him sat his wife Roxanne, my daughter-in-law of 10 years, 35 years old, and wearing a silk blouse I later learned cost more than my first car. The conversation had been strained from the moment they arrived. Forced pleasantries about the weather, hollow compliments about the meal. Then Roxanne set her wine glass down hard enough that Cabernet sloshed against crystal. "Buddy, the east bedroom has been empty for 6 years, Vernon," she said, her voice tight with rehearsed patience. "My parents have nowhere to go. It is just collecting dust." I set down my fork and looked at her carefully. "That room belonged to my wife. It stays as she left it. They lost everything." Roxanne continued louder now. "Their house in Florida, their savings, everything. They are about to be on the street." I kept my voice level, the way I had learned to do in 40 years of construction negotiations. "I am sorry for their difficulties, but that room is not available." Brent leaned forward, his practiced smile slipping. "Dad, come on. You are being unreasonable. They are family. Roxanne's parents have nowhere else to turn." I said no. Roxanne stood so quickly, her chair scraped against the floor I had personally installed. "You are sitting here in this mansion all alone, hoarding rooms you do not even use, while my parents are about to be homeless. Do you have any idea how selfish that is?" The word mansion struck me as particularly wrong. I had built this house with my own hands, beam by beam, over 2 years of weekends and evenings. It was not a mansion. It was a home. My wife had chosen every paint color, every door handle. Her bedroom, our bedroom, had been left exactly as it was the morning she did not wake up. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. Her favorite cardigan still hung on the back of the chair. "The room stays closed," I said. Roxanne's face flushed red. 6 years, Vernon. 6 years you have kept that room like some kind of shrine while real people are suffering. While your family needs help. It is pathetic." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. Clarity. This woman who I had welcomed into my home for a decade, who had eaten at this table hundreds of times, was calling my grief pathetic. Was calling the last physical space where I could still feel my wife's presence a waste. "Get out," I said quietly. "How does a conversation about roasted lamb turn into a weapon flying toward your face?" Roxanne grabbed the nearest object, ironically, the smartphone Brent had given me for Christmas, which I had set on the table to silence during dinner, and hurled it at my head with the full force of her fury. I saw it coming, but not fast enough to move. The corner of the phone caught me just above my left eyebrow. The impact made a sound like a branch snapping. Then came the blood. I have been hurt on construction sites before. Crushed fingers, twisted ankles, once a nail through my palm. But this was different. This was not an accident. This was family. I stood, and the room tilted. Warm blood ran into my left eye, blurring my vision. I reached for my handkerchief, white linen, the kind my wife always insisted I carry, and pressed it to my forehead. It came away red. Brent was on his feet, but he was not reaching for me. He was staring at his wife, then at me, then back at her. His mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out. Dad, you have to tell the police this was just an accident. You slipped. The phone fell. That is all. I lowered the handkerchief and looked at my son. Really looked at him. His first words to me bleeding on the floor were not, "Are you okay?" or "Let me help you," or even, "I am sorry." They were instructions on how to lie to the police. "Move aside, Brent," I said. Roxanne stood frozen by the table for perhaps 3 seconds. Then her face hardened into something I had never seen before. No remorse. No shock. Just cold calculation. Look what you made me do," she said, her voice flat. "If you had just been reasonable." I walked past both of them toward the front door. Blood dripped from my chin onto the hardwood floor I had sanded and sealed myself 42 years ago. The house was silent except for my footsteps and the sound of my own breathing. Brent followed me into the foyer. "Dad, please. Think about what this will look like. She did not mean it. You provoked her. Just tell them it was an accident." I stopped at the door and turned to face him. My son. The boy I had taught to use a level and read a blueprint. The young man I had brought into my company and groomed to take over everything I built. "Get out of my house," I said. I had built this house with my own hands, every beam and nail. And now I was bleeding on the floor I poured, listening to my son teach me how to lie. I pulled back my cuff to check my watch through blood-blurred vision. The glowing hands read 7:14 p.m. I memorized that time. Easter Sunday, April 9th, 2023, 7:14 p.m., the exact minute my family died. Brent was still talking, still explaining why I needed to protect Roxanne, protect him, protect all of us from the consequences of what had just happened. But I was not listening anymore. I was thinking about foundation work, about how you dig down deep before you build up, about how the strongest structures require the most preparation. I pressed the handkerchief back to my forehead and opened the front door. The cool evening air hit my face. Somewhere in the neighborhood I could hear children laughing. Easter egg hunts, probably. Families having the kind of holiday I thought I was having. Before I walked out, I made myself a promise right there in the doorway. They would regret every single drop. I walked to the end of my driveway and called 911 myself. I gave the operator my address and told her I had been assaulted. She asked if I was in immediate danger. I looked back at my house and said no. The danger had already passed. The ambulance siren cut through the quiet neighborhood like a knife, but inside the vehicle, I was perfectly calm. The paramedic, a competent-looking man in his 30s whose name tag read Hayes, applied pressure to my head wound with practiced efficiency. The gauze came away red, then pink, then red again. He worked quickly, wrapping a temporary bandage around my forehead that would hold until we reached the hospital. "Your vitals are surprisingly stable," he said, glancing at the monitor. "Most assault victims show elevated heart rate. You are at 72 beats per minute. Blood pressure 120/75. I tasted copper where I had bitten my cheek. The ambulance smelled like antiseptic and plastic. Outside the windows, streetlights blurred past. "I have survived worse than this," I said, reaching for my phone. My fingers left rust-colored smudges on the screen. "I need to make a call." Hayes frowned. "Sir, you should rest. We will be at the hospital in 10 minutes. You can call family then." But I was not calling family. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to the letter D. Lester Dalton answered on the second ring. 67 years old, my attorney for 3 decades, and the only man outside myself who knew where every legal and financial bone was buried. His voice came through with comfortable authority. "I'm Vernon. Happy Easter. What can I—" "Lester, I have been attacked. I'm on my way to Northwestern Memorial Emergency Room." Silence. Then, "My God. Are you—" "Meet me there. And bring the files I gave you to keep. The ones from 18 months ago." Another pause, shorter this time. When Lester spoke again, his voice had shifted into crisp, professional tone. "The sealed envelope, I understand. I will be there in 20 minutes. I ended the call and set the phone down. Hayes was looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. Not concern anymore. Something closer to curiosity. "You called your lawyer before you called your family," he said. "Yes. That is unusual." I touched the bandage on my forehead. It was already soaking through in one spot. "I am an unusual man. When does a 70-year-old man with blood soaking his collar reach for his phone to call a lawyer before calling anyone else? When he has been preparing for exactly this scenario for longer than anyone would believe." The ambulance took a corner, and I braced myself. Through the window, I could see Lakeshore Drive, the dark expanse of Lake Michigan stretching out like a void. Easter Sunday traffic was light. We would be at Northwestern Memorial in less than 5 minutes. Hayes adjusted the IV line in my left arm. Saline drip to keep my blood pressure stable. Standard procedure for head trauma. I watched the clear fluid move through the plastic tube with the same detached interest I had once used to watch concrete being poured. "You have done this before," Hayes said. "I've been in an ambulance. You stayed calm under pressure. You are thinking 3 moves ahead. I can see it." I almost smiled, but my face hurt. "I spent 40 years as a builder. You learn to calculate loads and stresses and points of failure. You learn to plan for the worst before it happens. Is that what this is, a plan?" I looked at him directly. He was younger than my son. Probably had not lived through the kind of betrayal that teaches you to trust structures more than people. But he was sharp. "I spent 40 years building things that last," I said. "Houses, companies, reputations. Tonight I am calculating a different kind of structure. One built on evidence and law and cold strategic patience." Hayes nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I had said. The ambulance slowed as we approached the hospital. Through the window, I could see the bright lights of the emergency bay, harsh white fluorescence. 2 orderlies waited by the entrance with a wheelchair. "Ah, those files you mentioned," Hayes said as he unstrapped the gurney restraints. "The ones from 18 months ago. You prepared them that long before tonight." I met his eyes. He was putting it together now. Understanding that this was not a spontaneous crisis. This was the execution of something I had been building for longer than he could imagine. "Yes," I said. "Why?" The ambulance came to a complete stop. The back doors opened and cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of exhaust and distant rain. The orderlies moved forward with practiced efficiency. "Because 18 months ago I discovered something," I said quietly so only Hayes could hear. "And I spent every day since then preparing for the moment when they would realize I knew." Hayes looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once the way you acknowledge someone who has just shown you a truth you cannot unsee. "What is in those files?" he asked. I did not answer. I let the orderlies help me down from the ambulance, my legs steadier than they had any right to be. Somewhere inside that hospital, Lester was already on his way with the leather briefcase that contained everything I had quietly, methodically, patiently gathered. As they wheeled me toward the emergency entrance, I caught Hayes watching me with that same curious expression. He did not need to know what was in those files. Not yet, but someone would need to know very soon. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room made everything look sterile and bloodless, which was ironic considering the amount of blood soaking my collar. They wheeled me into a private examination room where the antiseptic smell was so strong it burned my nostrils. The ER doctor, a competent woman in her 50s, whose name tag read Dr. Morrison, cleaned my wound with practiced efficiency while shaking her head at the depth of the laceration. Her gloved fingers pressed around the edges, testing. "You are going to need 12 stitches," she said. "The laceration is deep but clean. You are lucky it missed the eye by 2 inches." "Lucky," I repeated. The word felt wrong in my mouth. Lester arrived before they started the stitches, carrying his heavy leather briefcase like it contained state secrets. When he saw my face under the harsh lights, blood crusted in my eyebrow, the split skin angry and swollen, his expression hardened into something I had only seen a few times in 30 years. Not anger, recognition. "My God, Vernon," he said quietly. "This is not domestic violence. This is obstruction of justice. Your son tried to make you lie to police." I nodded once. Lester understood immediately what most people would miss. Brent's demand that I lie elevated this from simple assault to criminal conspiracy. Detective Kurt Ramsey arrived 20 minutes later. 42 years old, with granite features and eyes that had seen too many family betrayals. He stood in my hospital room, taking my statement with the precision of a man building a legal fortress. "Mr. Ashford," he said, pulling out a small recorder. "Can you walk me through exactly what happened tonight?" I recited the facts the same way I used to present structural load calculations to city inspectors. Numbers do not lie. Neither do timelines. Neither do head wounds requiring 12 stitches. At approximately 6:30 p.m., I hosted Easter dinner for my son Brent and daughter-in-law Roxanne. At 7:10 p.m., during an argument about housing her parents in my late wife's bedroom, Roxanne threw her smartphone. The device struck my head above the left eyebrow, causing the wound you see. My son's first words were not concern for my welfare, but a demand that I tell police it was an accident. Detective Ramsey's pen paused. "He asked you to lie to us." "Yes, multiple times. He specified I should say I slipped and the phone fell." Lester leaned forward. "Detective, that is textbook obstruction of justice. He was attempting to prevent truthful reporting to law enforcement." Ramsey nodded slowly, writing something in his notes that took longer than the words I had spoken. When people try to make you lie to police, they expose something darker than the crime itself. They show you who they really are. Dr. Morrison returned with her suture kit. The local anesthetic stung, going in 4 injections around the wound site to numb the area. Then came the methodical pull and tug of thread through skin. I counted each stitch. 12, just as she had promised. Each one a small, precise anchor holding torn tissue together. I spent the night at Lester's, insistence in a hotel room he paid for rather than return home. Too much evidence still needed to be preserved. Too many questions about what else might be waiting there. By 8:30 the next morning, I sat in Lester's law office in the Loop, drinking burnt coffee from a paper cup, while he worked his computer with the focused intensity of a man hunting proof. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, has a Ring camera on her front porch," Lester said, turning his laptop screen toward me. "The angle caught everything through your dining room window. I spoke with her this morning. She gave me access. The footage was grainy but clear enough." Black and white timestamp in the corner 1911-47, April 9th, 2023. I could see myself at the head of the table, Roxanne standing, the jerky motion of her arm. "In there," I said, pointing. "You can see her wind up. That is not a slip. That is intent." Lester nodded, his face grim in the blue light of the screen. "Exactly. Assault with a deadly weapon. The phone weighs 6 ounces and traveled approximately 4 feet at velocity. I have the device specifications. We can calculate the force on impact if needed." He saved the file to 3 different locations: his hard drive, a cloud backup, and an encrypted external drive that went into his office safe. The video disappeared into digital protection, like gold into a vault. "I am preserving this under attorney work product," Lester said. "They do not know this camera exists yet. When the time comes, this will be very difficult for them to explain. How many pieces of evidence does it take to build a case? I had spent 40 years learning that a foundation needs multiple support points. Load-bearing walls require more than one beam. This was just the first." Lester poured himself coffee and sat back in his chair, studying me over the rim of his cup. The morning sun cut through the windows of his office, illuminating dust motes in the air. Outside, Chicago was waking up to a normal Tuesday. Inside this room, we were building something that would not be finished for a long time. That is external evidence," Lester said carefully. "But Vernon, what about inside your house? You installed that security system 2 years ago after the break-in on your street. What did your own cameras capture?" I met his eyes. The question had been sitting between us since I arrived. The answer would lead us somewhere much darker than a neighbor's accidentally helpful doorbell camera. "I do not know yet," I said. "I have not been back to check." Lester set down his coffee cup. "We need to go there now, before anyone else does, before anything else disappears." The word hung in the air. Disappears. Not before we forget to check or before the footage cycles over. He said disappears, as if he already suspected what we would find, or more precisely what we would not find. We drove separately from Lester's office. He wanted to be there when I checked the system, but I needed to walk through my house alone first, to see what they had done. The house I built with my own hands felt different when I unlocked the front door that afternoon. Not like a home anymore, but like a crime scene waiting to reveal its secrets. The air inside was stale, undisturbed since Easter night. I could still smell the faint ghost of roasted lamb and rosemary. I went straight to the security room off my study. The monitoring system I had installed after the neighborhood break-ins 2 years ago covered every entrance, the main hallways, and my study. 6 cameras total, all networked to a central hard drive that stored 30 days of rolling footage. The screen showed me exactly what I expected and exactly what I dreaded. Wiped. Every camera from midnight Easter Sunday through 6 a.m. Monday morning. 6 hours of footage surgically removed. Not corrupted, not failed, deleted. He came back. My son returned to this house while I was in the hospital, getting 12 stitches, and he spent his time erasing evidence instead of checking if I was alive. But Brent had forgotten something. Something I had installed specifically because the security company recommended redundancy. My smart doorbell camera auto-uploaded every motion event directly to cloud storage, completely independent of the internal system. I pulled up the app on my phone, my hands steadier than they should have been. The timeline loaded. There, 11:03 p.m. Easter night. The doorbell's night vision showed my front door opening, a figure entering with a key. My son's face clearly visible in the infrared glow. I called Lester immediately. He stayed 47 minutes. I said when Lester answered. 11:03 p.m. to 11:50 p.m. He deleted everything from the internal cameras, But the doorbell caught him coming and going. Add evidence tampering and obstruction to the list. Lester was quiet for a moment. 47 minutes is a long time. What else was he looking for? That was the question that made my chest tighten. 47 minutes. My son spent 47 minutes in my house that night, not checking on his bleeding father, but erasing evidence of his wife's crime. That number would haunt me more than the assault itself. I walked through the rest of the house, slowly looking for what else might have changed. The study seemed untouched. The kitchen was exactly as I left it, dishes still in the sink from a dinner that ended in blood. The living room undisturbed. Then I opened the door to the east bedroom, my wife's room. For 6 years, I had kept this room exactly as she left it. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her favorite cardigan on the chair. The curtains she chose pale blue with white flowers still catching the afternoon light, the same way they had the morning she did not wake up. But something was wrong. I stood in the doorway trying to identify what had changed. Nothing looked moved, nothing missing. Then I saw them, pencil marks, tiny faint marks on the wall near the baseboards. I knelt down my knee, popping in protest, and ran my finger along the lines. Measurements. Width from corner to electrical outlet. Height from floor to windowsill. Someone had been in here with a tape measure and pencil recording dimensions. They were planning to renovate this room. Her room. The sacred space I had refused to let them violate. Roxanne had not asked about the room on Easter out of sudden desperation for her parents. She had already decided to take it. The argument was just theater, and when I refused to play my part, she threw the phone. My phone rang. I almost did not answer, but the caller ID showed my bank's main number, Mr. Ashford. The voice belonged to a cautious man who identified himself as bank manager Sterling. 20 years at the institution, he said. He spoke with the careful precision of someone who had seen enough fraud to recognize a scheme. I am calling about an incident from yesterday that our fraud department flagged for your attention. Go on. Someone came to our branch attempting to activate a power of attorney over your accounts. They claimed you were mentally incompetent to manage your own finances. We refused the request due to lack of proper documentation and notarization. I closed my eyes, standing in the middle of my wife's measured room. Who tried to activate it? Your son, Brent Ashford. He had forms, but they were not properly witnessed. Our legal department immediately rejected them and flagged your account for potential fraud. How long does it take to plan to destroy your father's life? Days, weeks. Or had they been measuring my wife's bedroom walls while she was still alive, counting down the years until they could finally take what they wanted? When was this? I asked. April 8th, the day before Easter. He came in Monday morning with the paperwork. The day before they came to my house for dinner. The day before the assault. This was not spontaneous rage. This was a systematic takeover that hit an unexpected obstacle when the bank refused fraudulent paperwork. Lester had quietly hired someone that morning, Wade Barton, 52, a former financial crimes investigator who now specialized in tracking money that people pretended did not exist. I would meet Wade soon enough. But right now, standing in this violated room with my phone pressed to my ear, I understood with perfect clarity that the assault was not the crime. It was the consequence of their real crime failing. Mr. Ashford, Sterling's voice pulled me back. There is one more thing you should know about that POA attempt. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, my other hand tracing the pencil marks on my wife's wall. What is it? Sought the paperwork your son presented. It was not new. The date on the forms was from 6 months ago, September of last year, which means they have been planning this since last fall. I finished. Sterling cleared his throat uncomfortably. At minimum. But Mr. Ashford, there is something else. The signature on those POA forms, the one allegedly from you, our fraud examiner, compared it to your signature card on file. It is not a match. Someone forged your signature. The forged signature haunted me for 3 weeks. Every time I signed a document, I wondered how many others existed with my name written in my son's hand. The safe swung open with a soft click, and I knew before I even looked inside that something was missing. Lester stood beside me in my study, his briefcase on the desk, the afternoon sun cutting through the windows in sharp geometric patterns that reminded me of blueprints. I kept my important documents in fireproof slots inside the safe. Passport in one, original deed to the house in another, marriage certificate, my wife's death certificate, and at the back where I had placed it 6 years ago after my wife died, my will. The slot was empty. The will. I said, my voice flat. It is gone. This is what he was looking for during those 47 minutes. Lester leaned in, examining the empty space as if it might reveal some hidden truth. Then he straightened and opened his briefcase with the calm efficiency of a man who had planned for exactly this scenario. "Shall I have the notarized copy?" he said, pulling out a thick document bound with a blue backing. "Your original signature witnessed by 3 parties filed with the state. Whatever he took is legally worthless without this." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the cold weight of calculation. Brent had broken into my house, deleted security footage, stolen what he thought was the key to my estate. All of it methodical. All of it planned. But Vernon Lester continued setting the copy on my desk. That will does not matter anymore. The most valuable assets the company shares, the trust accounts, the investment portfolio, they are not in your personal estate. I met his eyes. Because we moved them 18 months ago. Into a structure even a valid will cannot touch, Lester said. Let him keep that worthless paper. Let him think he has something. When the time comes, he will discover he was chasing shadows. 47 minutes. That was how long Brent spent in my house that night, tearing through my study looking for this will. 47 minutes hunting a document that was already worthless. If I had not moved those assets 18 months ago, his plan might have worked. But I had. Because 18 months ago, I discovered something that made me prepare for exactly this kind of betrayal. 2 weeks later, Stuart Fulton called my cell phone directly. Not through my assistant. Not through company channels. My personal number that fewer than 10 people possessed. "So, Mr. Ashford," he said, his voice tight with something between fear and determination. "I need to speak with you. Privately. It cannot wait." We met in his office at company headquarters. Stuart Fulton, my chief auditor for 25 years, 55 years old, with trembling hands, and a manila folder he had been too afraid to open until now, finally spread the records across the table. Lester came with me. This was no longer a family matter. This was criminal evidence, and every conversation needed a witness. "Mr. Ashford." Stuart began, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "I should have come to you 8 months ago. These subcontractors, none of them exist." He laid out page after page. Invoices for concrete work, electrical installations, plumbing repairs. All billed to the company. All approved by Brent. All paid out through accounts payable. "Ma phantom companies," Stuart continued. "I called the phone numbers. Disconnected. I searched the addresses. Empty lots. Residential homes that never hosted a business. But the money went out." "How much, Stuart?" I asked. His hands shook as he flipped through the ledger. "Every invoice was under $15,000, just below your signature threshold. Brent had autonomy up to that amount as vice president. He exploited it. I had given my son that authority 3 years ago. Trusted him to make decisions without running every purchase order past me. It was supposed to teach him how to run a company. Instead, it taught him how to rob one. "When did you discover this?" Lester asked, his attorney voice sharp and precise. 8 months ago. Last September. I noticed the pattern, same type of work, same dollar range, different company names every time. I started investigating. That is when I realized none of them were real. "And you did not report it," I said. Not a question, a statement. Stewart's face crumpled. "He told me it was a special trial project for the board. Confidential. He said you knew about it, but we were testing a new vendor approval system before rolling it out." I believed him. I was afraid of losing my job after 25 years if I questioned the vice president, and turned out to be wrong. How do you look at a man who has worked for you for a quarter century? A man who discovered your son was robbing you and stayed silent out of fear. Do you punish him for the silence, or thank him for finally finding the courage? "Surduka," I said quietly. "Thank you for coming forward now." He looked up at me surprised, maybe expecting anger, maybe expecting termination. But I understood fear. I understood the paralysis that comes from not wanting to believe the worst about someone you thought you knew. "Said I have more," Stewart said, pulling out another document. "Wade Barton and I have been working together for the past week. We traced the money. The shell companies were fronts. The funds went to intermediary accounts, then to final destinations we are still mapping. But Wade has the routing numbers, the bank records, all of it." Lester leaned forward. "Where did the money go?" "We are still confirming," Stewart said. "But preliminary analysis suggests gambling accounts and luxury purchases. And Vernon, there is a second stream. About 30% of the total went somewhere else entirely. Wade thinks it might be Roxanne's personal accounts, but we need more time to prove it." Stewart's voice dropped to barely a whisper when he read the final number. I did not need to hear it twice. I already knew what it meant. $250,000. The number landed like a nail gun misfiring into your palm, sudden, deep, impossible to ignore. $250,000. Every dollar stolen while I passed him the salt at Sunday dinners. The timestamp on the security footage read 2:17 a.m., and the figure on screen moving through my company's darkened hallway was unmistakably my son. Wade Barton's office smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. The monitor cast blue light across his desk, illuminating the grainy black and white footage from Ashford and Sons construction headquarters. 7 times in 6 months, Wade said, pointing at the screen with a pen. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. when security guards changed shifts. He knew the rotation schedule. I watched Brent move through the building with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Which he did technically. Vice President. My heir apparent. The man I had groomed to take over everything I built. What was he looking for? I asked. Wade leaned back in his chair. Stewart installed a second camera 9 months ago, hidden in the smoke detector in the archives room. Brent does not know it exists. Watch this angle. He switched to a different feed. Same night, different perspective. This camera looked down from above, catching Brent's movements with perfect clarity. I watched him approach the document safe, the one that held original contracts, transfer documents, and corporation papers. He pulled a flashlight from his pocket. The beam cut through the darkness as he worked the combination lock. "He has the combination," I said. "You gave it to him 2 years ago," Wade reminded me. "Emergency access in case something happened to you. He is using your trust as a skeleton key." The safe door opened. Brent's hands moved quickly, methodically, pulling files and photographing pages with his phone. The camera flash illuminated his face in brief white bursts. "He is not just embezzling Vernon," Wade said quietly. "He is building an exit strategy, looking for anything that proves ownership transfer documents, anything he can use or forge." I watched my son move through the darkness of the building I built, searching through files in the beam of a flashlight, and I realized I was watching a stranger. The boy who used to follow me around construction sites with a plastic hard hat was gone. In his place was a thief in the night. Just, there is more, Wade said. He turned off the monitor and spread a different set of documents across his desk. Financial statements, bank records, transaction histories. I traced where the money went. I looked at the papers, seeing numbers that told a story I did not want to read. $50,000 to illegal offshore lenders, Wade said. Gambling debt accumulated over 3 years through online poker and sports betting sites. But here is what you need to understand the embezzled company money. It is not buying a luxury lifestyle. It is barely covering interest payments. He pulled out another sheet showing payment schedules. 15 to 20% interest, compounding weekly. He is not reducing the principal. He is drowning Vernon. Every week he falls further behind. I sat back in my chair, the numbers swimming in front of me. $250,000 stolen from my company. But the debt that started it all, $50,000. The mathematics of desperation. Why did he not just come to me? I said. I stopped. Because Wade was looking at me with an expression that was almost pitying. Would you? Wade asked gently. Or would you have lectured him first about responsibility and consequences, about how you built this company with your bare hands and never gambled a penny? The words hung in the air. I wanted to argue, wanted to say, of course I would have helped my son. But Wade had asked the question that mattered, and we both knew the honest answer. These lenders do not negotiate, Wade continued. They break kneecaps. They burn down businesses. They make people disappear. Your son is running out of time, which makes him desperate. And desperate men do desperate things, like trying to declare their father incompetent, like forging power of attorney documents, like throwing phones at heads. I thought about Easter dinner, Roxanne's demand for the bedroom, Brent's immediate backup of her position, the escalation, the violence. What I had seen as a spontaneous assault was actually the endgame of a much longer crisis. How close are they? I asked. The lenders, to escalating. Wade pulled out a final document printouts of text messages from a number traced to a burner phone. The messages were short, blunt, increasingly threatening. How close, Wade said. Your son has maybe weeks, maybe less, which is why he moved from embezzlement to attempted financial takeover. He needs your full assets now, not eventually. Now. I left Wade's office an hour later with a briefcase full of evidence and a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with the assault. I sat in my truck in the parking structure, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. The concrete pillars around me cast long shadows in the dim fluorescent light. Why does a son fear his father's disappointment more than a loan shark's baseball bat? Because a broken bone heals in 6 weeks, but a father's judgment lasts forever. I had built a company, built a house, built a reputation for being fair but exacting, for demanding excellence and accepting nothing less. I had taught my son to use a level, read a blueprint, calculate load-bearing capacity, but I had never taught him how to ask for help, how to admit failure, how to say I am drowning without fearing the lecture about swimming lessons. Wade's question echoed in my head. Would you have helped him or lectured him first? I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 70 years old, 12 stitches above my left eye, still healing, betrayed by my own son. But the truth was more complicated than betrayal. My son was drowning, and instead of reaching for my hand, he reached for my throat, because I had taught him that drowning was a weakness, that asking for help was a failure, that a man stands on his own 2 feet, or he does not stand at all. I started the truck. The engine rumbled to life in the concrete silence. But understanding did not equal forgiveness. I could see the chain of fear and desperation that led to this moment, but that did not change what my son had done, what he had chosen. My phone rang before I made it home. Wade's name on the screen. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and answered. Wade's voice on the phone carried a different weight. This time, not the clinical tone of financial forensics, but the hesitation of a man about to deliver news that would break something irreparable. "Vernon," he said, "there is something else. I did not want to tell you over the phone, but you need to know before you get home." My hand tightened on the steering wheel. "What is it?" "While you were in the hospital Easter night, Roxanne came back to your house. She used a spare key we think she copied months ago. She went into your wife's bedroom." The world narrowed to the sound of Wade's breathing on the line and my own heartbeat in my ears. "What did she take?" I asked. Wade was quiet for a moment. "A wedding watch, gold delicate band, engraved with your marriage date. Vernon, she sold it. At Prestige Estate Jewelry 3 blocks from your house. For $340. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after Wade hung up. $340. I had paid electricians more than that to install a single outlet. I had spent more on a single bag of concrete mix for a foundation pour. But that watch, that delicate gold band, that barely weighed an ounce, had rested on my wife's wrist for 49 years. And they sold it for the price of a cheap dinner. I drove home in silence. The house felt different when I walked in. Contaminated. They had not just stolen money or forged documents. They had entered my wife's sanctuary, the room I had preserved for 6 years as my last connection to her, and they had stolen her memory for pocket change. I stood in her bedroom doorway. Everything looked the same. The curtains she chose, the reading glasses on the nightstand, but the small wooden case on her vanity, the one that held her wedding watch, sat open and empty. I had touched that watch every night for 6 years, held it in my palm, felt the engraving under my thumb. Our wedding date, June 12, 1974. 49 years of marriage reduced to a trinket someone pawned for gas money. That night I did not sleep. I sat in her room until dawn, staring at the empty watch case. When Prestige Estate Jewelry opened at 8 a.m., I was waiting at the door. The shop smelled like old leather and silver polish. Display cases lined the walls filled with other people's memories for sale. Wedding rings, pocket watches, lockets with faded photographs inside. The shop owner, a careful man in his 60s named Mr. Grayson, who ran Prestige Estate Jewelry with the discretion of someone who had seen too many family heirlooms sold under duress, looked up when I walked through the door. "Good morning," he said. "How can I help you?" "You purchased a gold watch recently," I said. "Women's, delicate band, engraved." Recognition crossed his face. He pulled a small tray from behind the counter. There it was. Her watch. Looking impossibly small and fragile under the harsh shop lights. "Ah, lovely piece," Grayson said, lifting it carefully. "Not much intrinsic value, gold content, maybe $200, but the craftsmanship is exquisite. The lady who sold it said her grandmother left it to her. Of course she did. Even to a pawnbroker, Roxanne could not tell the truth." "How much?" I asked. $450. I pulled out my wallet without hesitation, without negotiation. I would have paid 10 times that, 100 times. The money meant nothing. Getting her watch back meant everything. Grayson wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a small velvet box. I paid cash, took the box, and walked out into the morning sunlight. In my car, I opened the box with trembling hands. The watch lay nestled in white silk, catching the light. I lifted it out, feeling its familiar weight. Turned it over. The engraving was still there, unchanged. June 12, 1974. Her handwriting in my memory was clearer than the words on this medal, but the medal was what I could hold. You have to understand, everything else up to that moment had been strategy, evidence collection, legal maneuvering, cold calculation. But this retrieving her watch, this was not about winning a case. This was about love. And that is when I knew I would not just defeat them. I would erase them. I held the watch to my chest for a moment, eyes closed, breathing steady. Then I placed it in my breast pocket against my heart where it would stay. "I am sorry, sweetheart," I whispered to the empty car. "I am sorry they touched your things, but I have it back now. And I am going to make this right." I drove home with her watch resting in my breast pocket, feeling its weight against my chest with every heartbeat. I pulled into my driveway and sat with the engine running. Up until this moment, I had been building a legal case, gathering evidence, documenting crimes, playing the long game of patience and precision. But they had crossed a line that had nothing to do with money or law or justice. They had desecrated the one sacred thing I had left. I pressed my palm flat against the watch in my pocket, feeling my heart beat through the fabric. Steady, strong, 70 years old, and still beating like a hammer striking a nail. That is enough," I whispered to the empty air. "Now we begin in earnest." Beginning in earnest meant no more passive observation. It meant calling in every debt, every favor, every piece of leverage I had accumulated in 40 years of building relationships in this city. The young man sitting across from me in the conference room could not stop his hands from shaking. And I realized he was more terrified of this confession than he had been of my son's threats. Ellis Vincent, 26, a junior accounting clerk, with dark circles under honest eyes and hands that would not stop trembling, had requested this private meeting through 3 separate intermediaries before he finally built up the courage to sit in this chair. "To Mr. Ashford," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have come forward months ago. Your son, he made me forge your signature. Dozens of times. Payment orders. Shell subcontractors. He said if I refused or told anyone, he would fire me and make sure I never worked in Chicago again." I sat perfectly still, letting him speak. My wife's watch rested in my breast pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what had been stolen and what I had reclaimed. "How long?" I asked. 2 years, maybe longer. I have a younger sister in college. I could not lose this job. I was afraid. I am so sorry." He looked like he might cry, or vomit, or both. I thought about Brent standing over this young man, using fear and power to turn him into an accomplice. How many others had my son coerced? How many people had lived in this same terror? "You are not to blame, Ellis," I said quietly. "The fault lies with the man who coerced you. You lived under a threat I should have seen and stopped. Thank you for your courage now." He looked up at me, surprise washing over his face. He had expected anger, accusations, maybe even termination. Instead, I thanked him, because Ellis had the courage to confess after 2 years of terror. Stewart stayed silent for 8 months. The difference was not intelligence or morality. It was which man could no longer look at himself in the mirror. And I realized that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they were afraid. 2 days later, Lester called me to his office. Detective Ramsey was on speakerphone, his voice carrying that particular flatness that cops use when delivering evidence that will change everything. "We recovered deleted text messages from Roxanne's phone," Ramsey said. "Digital forensics pulled them from cloud backup, 3 days before Easter dinner." Brent to Roxanne. "We do this Sunday at dinner." Roxanne replies, "Do not hit him too hard." Brent responds, "Just make sure he is certified as mentally unfit. Once is enough." The doctor will do the rest. The office went silent. Lester was staring at the speakerphone like it had just confessed to murder, which in a way it had. The doctor will do the rest, I repeated. They had a physician ready to declare me incompetent. This was a complete operation. Premeditation, Ramsey said. Conspiracy to commit assault. Attempted fraud. This elevates everything, Vernon. This is not domestic violence anymore. This is organized crime. I sat back in my chair. They had sat at my table. They had eaten the lamb I roasted. They had smiled at me across the Easter lilies I put out, because my wife always loved Easter flowers. And they had already decided that was the night they would try to destroy me. The ice that had been forming around my heart since the assault solidified into something harder, something permanent. A week later, Wade called me to his office. He had that expression again, the one that meant he had found something I needed to see but would not want to know. He spread a financial flowchart across his desk. Color-coded lines tracking money from Ashford and Sons, accounts through shell companies to final destinations. Most of the lines were red, flowing to what I now knew were Brent's gambling accounts and loan shark payments. But there was a blue line, thinner than the others, steady, methodical. 70% went to Brent's gambling payments, Wade said, pointing at the red lines. But 30%, $75,000 went here. His finger traced the blue line to a single account. RH Properties Management, LLC, registered in Illinois. Owner Roxanne Marie Hewitt. Her maiden name. She registered this LLC 14 months ago, Wade continued. Separate banking. No connection to Brent's accounts. No connection to their joint finances. This is hers alone. Lester leaned forward, studying the chart. She is not just along for the ride. She is the architect. If Brent goes down, she has an escape fund he does not even know about. I stared at the screen. $75,000. Quietly siphoned away while Brent gambled and panicked and made desperate deals with loan sharks. While he stole and forged and assaulted his own father, she was building her exit strategy. What kind of woman plans her husband's downfall while sharing his bed? What kind of person builds an escape fund from the same theft that will send her partner to prison? The answer was simple. The kind who threw a phone at an old man's head for refusing to give up his dead wife's bedroom. The kind who stole a wedding watch and sold it for pocket change. The kind who was never an accomplice at all, but a predator who saw an opportunity in a weak man's desperation. Should we tell Brent? Lester asked. About her betrayal, it might flip him. Get him to testify against her. I shook my head slowly, still staring at the name on the screen. RH Properties Management. Her initials, hiding in plain sight. Chatung. I said. Let her think she is one. Let her think she is smarter than all of us. Let her believe that exit fund will save her. Why? Wade asked. I thought of her. Because what I am about to do next will give them both exactly what they wanted, I said. And then I am going to take it all away. Giving them what they wanted meant becoming exactly what they hoped I was old, forgiving, and foolish enough to forget. I let my hand shake slightly. As I reached for the restaurant door, a calculated tremor I had practiced in the mirror that morning. 4 months had passed since Easter. 4 months since the phone split my forehead. 4 months of gathering evidence while they waited on bail for a trial that would never come, not the way they expected. The restaurant was quiet, upscale, the kind of place where conversations stayed private and waiters knew when to disappear. I had chosen it deliberately. Neutral ground. No history. No ghosts. Brent stood when I entered, and I let him see me move more slowly than necessary. Shoulders more stooped, steps more careful. I had always been fit for 70, but today I was performing age. And Dad, he said the word catching in his throat. I lowered myself into the chair across from him, with exaggerated care the way a man does when his bones ache. "Thank you for meeting me," I said softly. He looked terrible, thinner than Easter. Dark circles under his eyes. The weight of what he had done, or maybe just the weight of getting caught, had carved lines into his face that had not been there 4 months ago. "Dad, I know things got out of hand on Easter." He began the words tumbling out in a rehearsed rush. Roxanne was under so much stress. Her parents, the money situation. She did not mean to at all, just spiraled. Things spiraled. I said nothing. Let him fill the silence. I should have stopped her. I should have called the ambulance immediately, instead of I was panicking. I made mistakes, but I never wanted you hurt. You have to believe that. I reached for my water glass with that same slight tremor, took a slow sip, set it down carefully. I have done a lot of thinking these past months, son, I said, pausing between words like a man choosing them with difficulty. About what matters, about family. I do not have many years left. I do not want to spend them angry. His eyes glistened, actual tears. Whether from relief or guilt or some combination I could not tell. Did not care. You mean that you would really consider, "I do not want to lose you, Brent. You are my only son." I had spent 40 years on construction sites, learning to read load-bearing walls and stress points. This was the same skill finding where someone would crack under pressure. But this time, I was applying pressure by taking it away, by appearing weak, by offering hope. Brent reached across the table like he might take my hand, then pulled back uncertain. "I will make this right, Dad. I promise. Whatever it takes." I nodded slowly, like a man who wanted desperately to believe. We ordered food, neither of us ate, talked about weather, and nothing. When we parted in the parking lot, he hugged me carefully like I might break. I drove away, knowing he would call Roxanne immediately, knowing he would tell her the old man was softening, knowing they would start making plans. A week later, I invited them both to my home. Lester was already there when they arrived, his briefcase on the coffee table, the picture of professional discretion. Roxanne had been released on bail 2 weeks prior. Assault charges pending. She walked into my living room like she was walking into a trap, which she was, though not the one she feared. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. The same couch where she had sat on Easter 4 months ago before everything burned. They sat, waited. I could see Roxanne's jaw tight, her eyes calculating. Brent looked nervous but hopeful. "I have been thinking about legacy," I said, letting my voice carry that same soft uncertainty from the restaurant. "About what I leave behind, about family. I want to establish a trust fund, $2 million, for future grandchildren, for a new beginning." The change in Roxanne was instant, absolute. Like watching a mask slip off and a different person emerge underneath. "Ah," she said, and the word stopped me cold because she had never called me that. Not once in 10 years of marriage to my son. Always Vernon. Always formal. Always cold. That is incredibly generous. She continued, her voice suddenly soft and sweet as honey. "You do not have to do this. We just want you healthy and in our lives." She reached over and patted Brent's knee with one hand, while her eyes stayed locked on me, warm and grateful and utterly false. How much does a soul cost? For Roxanne, the answer was $2 million, the exact price at which Vernon became dad and contempt transformed into concern. Brent was crying again, actual tears streaming down his face. "I do not know what to say. This is thank you, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on us." Lester outlined the basics. trust structure, distribution timeline, legal framework. All of it technically accurate for a trust that would never actually exist the way they imagined. There will be some paperwork, Lester said. Standard documentation. Nothing complicated. But this is a meaningful step, Vernon. A generous legacy. Roxanne was asking about my health now. My diet. Whether I was taking my medications. The same woman who threw a phone at my head was suddenly concerned about my blood pressure. "You look tired, Dad," she said, using that word again. "Are you sleeping well? You should not be under any stress. Not at your age." I smiled at her with grandfatherly warmth. "I am sleeping better now," I said. "Knowing we are rebuilding what was broken," she reached across the coffee table and patted my hand with theatrical tenderness, calling me Dad again in that sugary voice. I smiled back at her with grandfatherly warmth, thinking of her selling my wife's wedding watch for $340. The watch now resting in my breast pocket, measuring each calculated beat of my heart. The performance was flawless. They believed every word. Now came the hard part, building the trap they would steal themselves into. 2 days after the trust announcement, I sat across from Lester in his downtown office watching him draft documents that would never be valid. Share transfer agreements moving my company's stake to Brent. Property deeds for the Lincoln Park house. A revised will leaving everything to my son. All of it perfectly formatted, professionally written, completely fraudulent. "This feels wrong," Lester said, his pen hovering over the signature line. "I am creating false legal documents. If anyone finds out, no one will," I said. "Because the only person who will see these is the person stealing them, and he will not be reporting the theft to anyone." Lester looked at me across the desk. "You are setting a trap. I am not framing him. I am giving him exactly what he already wants to steal. He has been searching my study for weeks. I know because I checked the cameras. This time I am letting him find what he is looking for. And if he does not take them, he will. Greed is more reliable than gravity." Lester drafted the fake will first. $2 million trust fund. Full company ownership. The Lincoln Park house. Everything Brent thought he deserved written on expensive legal paper, with official seals that meant nothing. I signed each document with a flourish, my handwriting steady and clear. Not the trembling signature of a senile old man. The firm hand of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The August heat was making the law office air conditioning struggle. The HVAC unit labored somewhere above us, the sound echoing like heavy breathing. I ran my thumb over my signature on the fake will, feeling the ink still slightly wet. My father's voice came to me across decades. "A good trap is invisible until it is too late." "Where will you put them?" Lester asked. "Leather portfolio. On my study desk. Under the lamp. Visible enough to tempt. Not so obvious he suspects. What if he just photographs them? Then I have evidence of intent. But he will not just photograph. He will take the originals. Because in his mind, these documents are his inheritance. And you do not leave your inheritance sitting on someone else's desk." That night, I placed the portfolio exactly where I planned. Slightly visible. Slightly careless. An old man forgetting to lock up his most important papers. Then I went to bed and waited. Before I show you what happened next. Comment A. If you think Brent will take the bait, or B. if he will suspect a trap. Add one reason. Please note, the next part includes fictionalized details for narrative impact. If that is not for you, feel free to stop here. 3 nights later at 1:17 a.m. I lay in darkness, watching the security monitor on my nightstand. The screen glowed blue in the black room, showing 6 different camera angles of my empty house. Then the kitchen door opened. Brent moved through my house like he owned it. No hesitation, no fear. A penlight in his left hand, his phone in his right. He went straight to the study. I watched him cross the threshold, watched the penlight beam sweep across my desk, watched it stop on the leather portfolio. He opened it. Even on the grainy night vision footage, I could see his sharp intake of breath. He pulled out his phone and started photographing. Every page, every signature, every seal. Then he did exactly what I knew he would do. He closed the portfolio and lifted it, slid it into his messenger bag. My fake inheritance stolen by the man who thought it was real. He pulled out his phone and whispered to someone. Roxanne, certainly. I have everything. The will, the shares, the property deeds, all signed. I hit the save button on the security app. The video file locked with a timestamp 1:13 a.m. September 2nd, 2023. My hand trembled slightly as I saved it. Not from fear, from the weight of what I was watching. My son had just committed felony burglary, and I had every second on camera. I remembered teaching him to use a level when he was 8 years old. We were building a treehouse in the backyard. Always check if the foundation is true, Brent, I had told him. Everything else depends on it. Now my son had no true foundation left, just greed and entitlement, and the willingness to break into his father's house and steal what he thought was rightfully his. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds, took 3 breaths, then opened them and watched him leave through the kitchen door, my fake documents in his bag, believing he had won. I sat in the darkness for a long time after he left, the blue glow of the monitor washing over my face. Then I opened the security app history. That is when I saw them. 4 other entries, 4 other nights over the past 6 weeks, always between midnight and 2 a.m. Always straight to the study. Brent had been searching for those documents for over a month, breaking into my house, going through my desk, my safe, my files. The fake papers were not just bait. They were the answer to a question he had been desperately asking. I stared at the log. September 2nd, August 28th, August 19th, August 11th, July 30th. 5 break-ins total. 5 times my son had violated my home while I slept. I opened my phone contacts, hovered over Lester's name, then closed the phone. Not yet. I needed one more piece of evidence, proof that Brent intended to use these stolen documents, that this was not just opportunistic theft, but part of a larger plan. I opened my email and began typing to Stuart, my CFO. I need you to schedule a full financial review meeting for next week. Make sure Brent knows about it. Tell him I am planning to update my estate documents and want the board to review all assets and ownership structures. I read it twice, hit send, then I whispered to the empty bedroom, to the blue glow of the security monitor, to the ghost of my son creeping through my house like a thief. Come on, son. Show me what you are going to do with your stolen treasure. Stuart scheduled the financial review meeting for the following Thursday. But before that meeting could happen, Brent called Lester directly. He wanted to expedite the trust setup. He wanted it done immediately. He did not say why, but I knew. He had stolen documents he thought gave him leverage, and he wanted to lock in his inheritance before I could change my mind. Brent's lawyer had already ordered coffee for everyone, a presumptuous gesture that told me he expected this meeting to be brief and pleasant. We gathered in Lester's boardroom on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. Me, Brent, Roxanne, Lester, and Gregory Marsh, Brent's attorney, mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who bills by the quarter hour and misses details because he assumes every case in Chicago is beneath him. "Thank you all for coming," Lester said, spreading documents across the mahogany table. "This should be straightforward. The trust structure is standard. But there are some preliminary certifications required by the IRS before we can establish a trust of this size. He slid a stack of papers toward Brent and Roxanne. The trust documents were on top. Beneath them, buried in the middle of the stack, was a single page titled Financial Certification Statement. This certification simply confirms that any personal draws against company capital have been properly accounted for. Lester said, his voice carrying that careful legal neutrality he had perfected over decades. Standard procedure before establishing a trust of this size. The IRS requires acknowledgement that all financial transactions between family members and the company have been disclosed and settled. Gregory Marsh picked up the certification page, skimmed it with the speed of someone who has read 10,000 similar forms. Looks routine. My client has no issue signing. I watched Brent take the pen Lester offered. Watched him sign his name at the bottom of the certification without reading the middle paragraph. The paragraph that stated in clear legal language that the signatories acknowledged utilizing company capital for personal expenditures totaling approximately $250,000, and that said expenditures had been fully accounted for and settled as of this date. An admission of embezzlement. Signed, dated, witnessed. Roxanne signed next, her signature flowing across the page with confidence. She looked up at me and smiled. This is very generous, Dad. I watched her pen move across the signature line and remembered her laughing at Easter dinner 3 hours before my son hit me with a phone. Remembered her selling my wife's watch for pocket change. Remembered her calling me pathetic for keeping a dead woman's bedroom as a shrine. There, Brent said, setting down the pen. All settled. When do I get access to the trust funds? Lester gathered the signed documents with practiced efficiency. These will need to be filed and processed. Several weeks at minimum, but everything is in order now. Gregory Marsh stood, shook hands with Lester, checked his phone. Another case, another client, another quarter hour to bill. He had just let his client sign a legal admission to a $250,000 crime, and he had no idea. 3 days later, I sat in Wade's office in the West Loop. Lester was with me. Stuart Fulton had come from the company bringing his own set of records. Wade spread the evidence across his desk like a general laying out a battle plan. I say every dollar is traced, Wade said, pointing at a flowchart that looked like a spider web. Shell accounts to intermediaries to final destination. Your son was not as clever as he believed. Stuart opened his laptop, pulling up the forensic accounting report. His hands did not shake anymore. He had confessed his silence months ago. Now he was part of the solution. Milai Stuarti. The numbers match what they just signed, Stuart said. They admitted to approximately $250,000 in embezzlement. We have documentation of exactly $249,873. Wade pulled out another file. Bank records, transaction logs, dates and times and routing numbers, the entire money trail from Ashford and Sons accounts through shell companies to Brent's gambling payments and Roxanne's hidden LLC. 70% went to cover his debts, Wade said. 30% went to her exit fund. They were stealing from the company and from each other. Lester leaned back in his chair. This is enough for prosecution. The district attorney will take this case. Signed admission of guilt, complete financial documentation, security footage of burglary, text messages proving premeditation. This is not a case. This is a gift. The evidence box sits on Wade's desk, like a foundation stone, heavy, immovable, the weight that everything else would be built upon. Wade began packing everything into a document box. Each piece of paper placed with care. Each photograph labeled. Each bank record cross-referenced. When he finished, he sealed the box with evidence tape and signed across the seal. Hatutitium. This has been photographed and digitally backed up in 3 separate, secure locations, Wade said, meeting my eyes. I have sent courtesy copies to 2 colleagues. If anything happens to you or to this box, the DA gets everything automatically. I looked at him. You think I am in danger? I think desperate people do desperate things. And your son is very desperate. Lester nodded. Wade is right. You no longer control when this goes to prosecution. That is by design. For your protection, Wade handed me a single key. This box is yours, but the copies are insurance. When you are ready, you take this to the DA. But if you wait too long or if something happens, it goes anyway. I took the key, felt its weight. A small piece of metal that would unlock the end of my family. Wade slid the box across his desk toward me. I stood and lifted it. The weight surprised me. 12 pounds of paper photographs and financial records. 12 pounds of evidence. 12 pounds of my son's crimes documented and sealed. My hands remembered another weight, the shovel on my first construction job at 19. Walking onto that site at dawn, the foreman handing me that tool, my palms bleeding by lunch, the foundation trench 6 feet deep. That foundation never cracked in 51 years. I held the box against my chest and carried it out of Wade's office into the September afternoon. I carried that box home and locked it in my study safe. 12 pounds of evidence that would send my son to prison. I sat with it for 2 weeks, trying to decide when to deliver it to the district attorney. Trying to decide if I wanted to see Brent one more time before I destroyed him completely. Wade's call came at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in early October, which meant he had found something he did not want to risk putting in an email. "To Vernon," he said when I answered. "We need to talk, now." I sat down at my desk, the evidence box visible in the open safe behind me. "What is it?" Roxanne met with Catherine Hoffner 3 months ago. July. Hoffner specializes in high-asset divorce cases where criminal charges intersect with asset protection. She is expensive, discreet, and ruthlessly effective. I said nothing. Let him continue. Roxanne filed preliminary asset inventories last week. The 30% in her LLC, she is claiming it as separate marital property acquired before the marriage through independent business ventures. If she files for divorce before the criminal trial, she might be able to shield it. So she is abandoning ship before it sinks. I said. Exactly. And Brent has no idea. She is still playing the loyal wife, still showing up to family dinners, still calling you dad. But she has been planning her exit for 3 months. I thought about that. Roxanne smiling across my coffee table. Roxanne patting my hand with false tenderness. Roxanne asking about my health and my medications, while her divorce attorney filed paperwork to protect the money she stole from me. How does she know we have evidence of her LLC on auction? I asked. I do not think so. She is operating on the assumption that if Brent goes down, she walks away clean. She thinks she has been careful. She has not. After Wade hung up, I sat in the darkness of my study for a long time. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy like it is waiting for something to break. How many times had I passed her? The potatoes refilled her wine glass, listened to her call me dad, all while knowing she was stealing from me. How many times had I smiled at her across that table while she planned to take everything I built and then abandon the wreckage? Lester arrived an hour later. I had not called him, but he showed up anyway. Maybe Wade had alerted him. Maybe he just knew I would need someone to talk to after that phone call. He sat in the chair across from my desk. The evidence box was still visible in the safe. We both looked at it for a moment. Then Lester looked at me. "When did you really know?" he asked. "Not suspect. No. I had been waiting for someone to ask me that question for a long time. I looked at Lester, my friend for 30 years, my attorney, the man who had helped me build the case that would destroy my family, and I told him the truth. 18 months ago, October of 2021, a dinner receipt. Lester leaned forward. Tell me. Brent charged a dinner to the company card. $300. He told me it was a client dinner. New contractor we were courting. I asked which contractor. He gave me a name. I called that contractor the next day to follow up. He said he was in Denver that week. He was not at any dinner in Chicago. Lester was very still. One lie. One lie. So I looked deeper. Started checking expense reports more carefully. Started noticing patterns, shell companies, invoices just below my signature threshold. It took me 2 months to see the full picture, but once I saw it, I could not unsee it. You have known since December of 2021, Lester said quietly. You sat across from them at Easter 2023, knowing everything. You ate dinner with them. You smiled at them. I waited, I said. Because I needed irrevocable evidence. I needed documentation so airtight that no lawyer, no judge, no jury could question it. I needed time to build that case. So I waited. I passed the potatoes. I poured the wine. I listened to their lies. And I built my trap. Lester's question, how did you bear it, lands in my chest like a physical weight, because the honest answer is barely. The assault, Lester said. On Easter. You knew they were embezzling when they came to that dinner. Yes. So when Roxanne threw that phone at your head, I was not surprised they were capable of violence. I was only surprised it happened before I was ready. But it turned out to be perfect timing, because the assault gave me the criminal case I needed. The embezzlement alone is white-collar crime. Financial restitution. Maybe a year in prison if the DA pushes. But assault, conspiracy, attempted fraud, that is real time. That is consequences. Lester sat back, looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. How did you bear it? He asked again. 18 months. 18 months of dinners and conversations and pretending you did not know they were destroying you. I did not have a good answer. Did not have words for the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The mornings I looked at myself in the mirror and wondered if I was becoming something I did not recognize. The moments I almost broke and confronted them, almost threw it all away just to stop the pretending. But I thought of my wife, I said finally. She taught me to prune roses. You have to understand the whole structure of the plant before you make the first cut. If you cut too early in the wrong place, you kill it. So you wait. You watch. You learn where every branch leads. And then when you are certain, you cut. Clean. Decisive. Final. I stood and walked to the window. The dark garden stretched out below my wife's roses, sleeping under the October chill. Lester's question hung between us in the quiet room. How did you bear it for 18 months? The answer was in the garden. In the patience she taught me, in the understanding that some structures take time to reveal themselves completely. I bore it, I said to the glass, because I knew how it would end. Understanding the structure meant knowing when to cut. I had watched. I had waited. I had documented every branch of their betrayal. Now it was time to prune. The formal notice went out on November 2nd at 9 a.m. Extraordinary meeting of the Board of Directors convened under Article 7, Section 3 of the Corporate Bylaws by Vernon Ashford, Chairman and Majority Shareholder. Agenda item, breach of fiduciary duty by Vice President. I was in Lester's office when he sent it. Electronic notification to all board members. Formal paper copy delivered by courier to Brent's office at company headquarters. legal, binding, unstoppable. He will call you, Lester said. I know. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Brent's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Why? He said, his voice carrying that forced, casual tone people use when they are trying not to sound afraid. What is this board meeting about breach of fiduciary duty sounds serious? It is about the company, all I said. Just come. I have a major announcement to make. An announcement, Dad, if this is about me taking over as chairman, just come to the meeting, Brent. November 8th, 10 a.m. I hung up before he could ask more questions. Lester looked at me across his desk. He thinks you are stepping down. I know. He thinks this is his coronation. Let him think that. Let him walk into that boardroom believing he has already won. I imagined Brent hanging up that phone in his office, hands shaking, though he had no reason to be afraid, not yet. His father was old. His father was forgiving. His father had signed the trust documents. His father had invited him back into the family. This was just the final step, he would have told himself. The formal transfer of power. The moment he had been working toward for years, but his hands kept shaking anyway. The days between the notice and the meeting stretched like a held breath. I went through my routines, reviewed the evidence one more time with Wade and Lester, made sure every document was perfect, every signature verified, every transaction traced, every lie documented. On the morning of November 8th, I woke before dawn. The house was cold. November in Chicago carries a particular kind of chill, not the sharp bite of deep winter, but the slow creep of death coming for the year. I made coffee and carried it outside to the garden my wife planted. The November garden looks skeletal, all the soft growth stripped away, leaving only the essential structure, the bones of what she built. The roses are dormant, the perennials cut back to their crowns. Everything waiting for spring that feels impossibly far away. I sat on the stone bench she chose drinking coffee in the gray pre-dawn and thought about the 18 months I had waited. 18 months of silence. 18 months of dinners with people who were stealing from me. 18 months of watching my son become someone I did not recognize. You taught me to wait, I said to the empty garden. To see the whole structure before making the cut. I saw it, sweetheart. I saw all of it. The sky lightened slowly. Dawn came late in November. I finished my coffee and went inside. In my study, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. The small wooden box sat where I had placed it, after buying it back from the pawn shop. I lifted the lid. Her wedding watch lay on white silk, the delicate gold band catching the light from the desk lamp. I picked it up carefully, turned it over. The engraving was still there. June 12, 1974. 49 years ago. A lifetime. I slipped it onto my left wrist. It was impossibly small, delicate, feminine. It looked ridiculous on my thick, scarred builder's wrist. The band barely closed. But I needed her with me today more than I needed dignity. I am sorry I could not protect it, I said, looking at the watch. I am sorry they took it from you, but I got it back. And today, I finish this. I dressed in my best suit. Dark blue, conservative tie. The uniform of a man who had spent 40 years building a company and a reputation. I checked the watch again. 7:45 a.m., 2 hours until the board meeting. I stood at the study window looking out at the garden, the skeletal roses, the stripped perennials, the bare earth waiting for spring. Everything my wife planted still alive under the surface, just waiting for the right moment to grow again. The watch ticked against my wrist, each second measured and precise. The same watch that had measured 49 years of our life together. The same watch that had been on her wrist the morning she did not wake up. The same watch that Roxanne sold for $340 and I bought back for $450. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass of the window, felt the November chill through the pane, saw my reflection overlaid on the garden, a 70-year-old man in a dark suit with a woman's delicate watch on his wrist, about to destroy his only son. Today is the day. I whispered to the empty garden, to the ghost of my wife, to the cold November morning. And then we can rest. The watch read 7:47 a.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes until the board meeting. 2 hours and 13 minutes until I would walk into that boardroom and present evidence of every crime my son committed. Every dollar stolen. Every lie told. Every document forged. Every midnight break-in. Every moment of betrayal documented and sealed and ready for prosecution. 18 months of patience. 18 months of waiting. 18 months of watching the whole structure reveal itself. Now it was time to cut. I arrived at the boardroom at 9:30. Early, deliberate. I wanted to be sitting at the head of the table when they walked in. Wanted them to see me calm, composed, ready. Brent's new Italian suit cost $4,000, purchased specifically for what he believed would be his coronation as chairman. I could see it the moment he walked through the boardroom door at 10 a.m. The expensive fabric, the perfect fit, the tie that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. He had dressed for triumph. Roxanne walked beside him in a cream silk blouse and tailored skirt. Both of them smiling. Both of them radiating the confidence of people who believe they have already won. Brent carried a leather folder. I knew without seeing it that he had prepared a speech, probably handwritten, probably thanking me for my trust and my mentorship and my willingness to pass the torch to the next generation. Dad. Lester. Good morning, everyone. Brent said, his voice carrying that forced, jovial tone he always used when he was trying to seem relaxed. Then he saw them. Wade Barton sat at the far end of the conference table, Stuart Fulton beside him, and 3 outside board members I had invited specifically for this meeting. Harold Dennison, a retired construction executive in his 60s, who had served on our board for 12 years. Margaret Yates, a corporate attorney specializing in construction law, who handled our compliance oversight. And Thomas Reeve, the finance professional, who chaired our audit committee. Brent's prepared smile froze on his face. Not gone, just suddenly wrong. Like a mask that no longer fits properly. Sit down, Brent, I said. Roxanne, you may stay or leave. This concerns you both. Roxanne looked at Wade, then at me, then at Brent. Why is the investigator here? No one answered. Brent and Roxanne sat. The leather folder with his speech remained closed on the table in front of him. Thank you all for coming, I said, looking at each board member in turn. What I am about to show you is difficult, but necessary, and documented beyond any question. I stood, picked up the remote control for the projector. The screen behind me came to life, showing a title slide I had prepared with Lester's help, Evidence of Breach of Fiduciary Duty, compiled by Wade Barton Investigations, certified by Stuart Fulton, Chief Financial Officer. No, Brent said. Just that one word. Quiet. Desperate. I clicked to the next slide. Security footage from my neighbor Mrs. Calloway's Ring camera. Date stamp April 9th, 2023, 7:11 p.m. The video played. My dining room window visible in the frame. Roxanne's arm raising, the phone leaving her hand. My head snapping back. This is the assault that sent me to the hospital with 12 stitches, I said. My voice did not shake, did not rise, just stated facts. Easter Sunday. The weapon was a smartphone. We will return to that phone shortly. Next slide. Doorbell camera footage. My front door. Timestamp 1:03 a.m. Brent entering with a key. 47 minutes later, Brent leaving with a messenger bag. This is my son breaking into my house to delete security footage and steal documents he believed were my will and estate papers. The documents were fake. I placed them deliberately. But the burglary was real. Felony breaking and entering. Roxanne's chair screeched backward as she stood abruptly, the sound cutting through the silent boardroom like a scream. "This is insane! You are setting him up!" "Sit down," Margaret Yates said, her attorney voice sharp and commanding. "Let him finish." Roxanne sat. Next slide. Text messages. Brent to Roxanne 3 days before Easter. "We do this Sunday at dinner." Roxanne's reply, "Do not hit him too hard." Brent's response, "Just make sure he is certified as mentally unfit. Once is enough. The doctor will do the rest." Premeditated assault, I said. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Plans to have me declared incompetent and seize control of my assets through falsified medical certification. Next slide. Shell subcontractor invoices. Page after page. Fake companies. Disconnected phone numbers. Empty addresses. Next slide. Cash flow diagram. Lines tracking money from company accounts through intermediaries to final destinations. 70% to Brent's gambling debt payments. 30% to an LLC owned by Roxanne under her maiden name. $250,000, I said. Embezzled over 2 years through fake subcontractors. You both signed admission of this on September 14th. That document is Exhibit 12. Brent tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Next slide. Forensic forgery analysis. My signature on dozens of payment orders compared to my actual signature. Ellis Vincent's confession statement as a witness. I turned off the projector. The screen went dark. The boardroom was absolutely silent. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the phone. The same phone that had split my forehead open. The same phone Brent had given me for Christmas. The same phone that contained 2 years of text messages and photos and GPS data proving every lie. I placed it on the polished mahogany table with a decisive click. The sound echoed in the silent room. "This is the weapon," I said. "It is also the storage device. Everything is on it. Every text message. Every photo of the fake documents Brent stole. Every location ping from his midnight break-ins. Everything." Brent's voice broke when he finally managed to speak. "Dad, I can explain how you built this in 2 years," I said, cutting him off. "Embezzlement, assault, burglary, forgery, conspiracy. I documented all of it. Every crime, every lie, every midnight theft. Stewart discovered the embezzlement 8 months ago and stayed silent out of fear. Ellis confessed to being coerced into forgery. Wade traced every stolen dollar. Lester compiled every legal violation. I looked at my son across the table. His expensive suit, his frozen face, his complete and total destruction playing out in real time. I watched his face collapse and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just the flat completion of a necessary task. The phone sat between us on the polished wood. Small, ordinary, containing everything that would send him to prison. "This is everything you built in 2 years, I said. The phone sat on the table between us. Evidence, weapon, the physical manifestation of every crime my son had committed. Brent stared at it like it might explode. Lester stood slowly pulling a blue legal folder from his briefcase, and the sound of the clasp opening cut through the boardroom silence like a gunshot. "There is one more thing," Lester said, opening the folder with deliberate care. "The financial certification you and Roxanne signed on September 14th. Do you remember that document?" Brent looked up. confused, still trying to process the evidence I had just presented, still trying to find a way out. The trust paperwork, Roxanne said. The certification was just routine tax documentation. Your lawyer said. On September 14th, Lester continued, you both signed acknowledgement of personal use of company capital for personal expenditures. That signature triggered a forfeiture clause embedded in Section 14B of the Family Trust, established by Vernon. By admitting to the use of company funds, you automatically voided all beneficial rights under that trust. The $2 million inheritance terminated immediately. With no probate recourse, the silence that followed was absolute. Then Roxanne understood. I watched comprehension dawn on her face, watched it transform from confusion to horror to rage. You said it was just paperwork, she hissed at Brent. You said it was routine. You said your father's lawyer confirmed it was standard procedure. It was, Brent said, his voice hollow. It was supposed to be. $2 million. It was, gone, I said quietly. You signed away your inheritance 5 weeks ago. You have been disinherited since mid-September. You just did not know it. Roxanne turned to Brent with fury that was almost physical. You idiot! She screamed at him, her voice cracking with rage so loud that the board members flinched backward in their chairs. You signed away everything. Everything we worked for. Everything we... She stopped, caught herself. But too late. The we hung in the air. The admission that they had planned this together. That they had worked as a team to steal from me. To destroy me. To take what they thought was rightfully theirs. The trust was a trap. Brent said, looking at me with something like awe. All of it. The reconciliation. The forgiveness. The $2 million. It was all, everything you wanted, I said. I gave you exactly what you wanted, and you took it. You signed the admission. You stole the fake will from my house. You broke in 5 separate times searching for documents that would make you rich. And all of it was bait. Margaret Yates cleared her throat. Her attorney voice cut through the chaos with professional precision. I move that this board vote immediately on 2 items. First, termination of Brent Ashford from all positions with Ashford and Sons Construction effective immediately. Second, referral of all evidence to the Cook County District Attorney for criminal prosecution. All in favor? Aye, said Harold Dennison. Aye, said Thomas Reeve. Aye, said Stuart Fulton. Aye, said Margaret Yates. 4 votes. Unanimous among the independent board members. I did not vote. I did not need to. The motion carries, Margaret said. Mr. Ashford, you are hereby terminated. This board refers all evidence to the appropriate authorities for prosecution. That was when the boardroom door opened. Detective Kurt Ramsey walked in, early 50s, methodical and professional, a Chicago PD financial crimes investigator who had been coordinating with Wade for the past month. He had been waiting in the corridor, waiting for the vote, waiting for my signal. Brent Ashford. Roxanne Ashford. Ramsey said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone who has done this 1,000 times. You are under arrest for embezzlement conspiracy to commit fraud and felony assault. You have the right to remain silent. He continued reading their rights while pulling out handcuffs. 2 sets. Chrome catching the fluorescent boardroom lights. Brent stood. Roxanne stood. Neither of them fought. Neither of them ran. Where would they run? The evidence was complete. The vote was final. The arrest was inevitable. Ramsey cuffed Brent first, hands behind his back. The expensive Italian suit wrinkling as the metal closed around his wrists. My son, 38 years old, wearing $4,000 worth of fabric, being arrested for crimes he committed against his own father. I watched the handcuffs close around his wrists and realized I had just destroyed the last living connection to my wife. Our son. The boy we raised together. The child she loved more than anything. Gone. Not dead. But gone in a way that might be worse. Roxanne was next. She did not scream anymore. Did not rage. Just stood there with her hands behind her back, letting Ramsey cuff her with the same mechanical efficiency. "Let's go," Ramsey said, guiding them toward the door. Brent stopped in the doorway, turned back. The handcuffs caught the fluorescent light, throwing small reflections across the walls. He looked at me across the empty boardroom, across the table where I had just presented evidence of every crime he committed, across the space where 40 years of my work had built something he tried to steal. No anger in his eyes, no pleading, no defiance. Just comprehension of absolute defeat, understanding that he had lost everything, that I had taken everything, that there was nothing left. I held his gaze, said nothing. Let the silence carry what 38 years of words could not. Let him see in my face what I had become, what he had made me become. I thought of teaching him to use a level when he was 8. Thought of his first day working on a job site. Thought of the pride I felt watching him grow into a man. All of it gone, replaced by this moment. Father and son, destroyer and destroyed. Both of us understanding that this was how it ended. Ramsey touched Brent's shoulder, guided him through the door, and my son was gone. The boardroom emptied in silence. Margaret Yates gathered her folders without looking at me, her hands steady, but her face pale. Harold Dennison shook my hand once, firm, his grip strong despite his 73 years, and walked out without a word. Thomas Reeve paused at the door, turned back, nodded slowly, then followed the others into the hall. Only Lester remained standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, watching the street 3 stories below where 2 patrol cars sat with their lights off waiting. "They are gone," he said quietly. I stood at the head of the table where I had presented 18 months of evidence. The 12-pound box sat where I had left it, lid, open papers visible in neat stacks. My wife's watch felt warm against my wrist, the gold band catching the overhead lights. Outside, the November sky had turned gray heavy with clouds promising snow before nightfall. "We need to talk," I said. Lester turned from the window. "Your office or mine?" "And yours." We walked down the hall in silence past the reception desk, where Paula sat with red eyes, past the conference room where Wade was on his phone, his voice low and professional. Lester's office was smaller than mine, lined with legal books and framed diplomas from Northwestern. He closed the door, gestured to a leather chair that creaked when I sat, and settled behind his desk. The room smelled like old paper and coffee. He looked tired. We both were. "There is one more thing the board needs to know," I said. "Something I put in place 18 months ago, the same week I first discovered what Brent was doing." Lester leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "What kind of thing?" "An irrevocable trust." I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of the words. 100% of my company shares, transferred to an independent legal firm as trustee, locked exclusively to fund 2 charities, a sanctuary for elderly victims of domestic violence, and trade scholarships for underprivileged youth who want to learn construction, plumbing, electrical work. Real skills. He stared at me. For 10 seconds, maybe 15, he said nothing. The office was utterly silent. Then he exhaled, slowly removed his glasses, set them on the desk, and rubbed his eyes with both hands. "Vernon," he said finally, "you gave away the entire company." "I protected it," I corrected. "Brent cannot inherit what no longer exists in my estate. Roxanne cannot claim what was never mine to give. The company continues operating. The board remains in place. Every employee keeps their job, their benefits, their pension. But the profits go where they can do genuine good instead of funding gambling debts and shell corporations and lies. Lester picked up his glasses, held them up to the light, then set them down again. When did you finalize this? November 15th, 2021. 6 weeks after I realized my son was stealing from me. I met with a trust attorney in Evanston, a woman named Patricia Caldwell, who specializes in irrevocable charitable structures. Signed the paperwork in her office on a Thursday afternoon. Paid the filing fees in cash. It has been active for 2 years. Does Brent know? He will, I said. His attorney will inform him during discovery. Or perhaps Roxanne's divorce lawyer will find it first when she searches for marital assets. Either way, they will both learn there is nothing left to fight over, nothing to steal, nothing to divide. Lester put his glasses back on and looked at me for a long moment. You planned all of this from the beginning. I planned to protect what my wife and I built, I said, and to make sure that if I could not leave it to my son, I would leave it to people who need it more than he ever did. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled just a little, the corners of his mouth turning up. Your wife would be proud, Vernon. I looked at the watch on my wrist. The delicate gold band caught the light from his desk lamp. I hope so, Lester. I truly hope so. The legal aftermath unfolded exactly as Wade had predicted it would. Roxanne's emergency divorce filing collapsed within 72 hours when her attorney, Catherine Hoffner, discovered both the prenuptial agreement and the complete forensic evidence linking her directly to the embezzlement scheme. She withdrew the petition on November 14th. The $75,000 in her LLC was seized as part of the restitution order, the exit fund she built by betraying both her husband and her father-in-law, now went toward repaying the company she helped rob. Both Brent and Roxanne accepted plea agreements rather than face a jury trial with the mountain of evidence against them. Brent pled guilty to embezzlement, felony burglary, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He received 7 years in a minimum security state correctional facility in southern Illinois. Roxanne pled guilty to embezzlement and second-degree assault. She received 4 years at a women's correctional center downstate near Decatur, with eligibility for early release after 18 months. Roxanne's parents, Floyd and Lorraine Hewitt, both in their late 60s and retired to Scottsdale, faced IRS penalties for failing to report the $75,000 she had funneled through her limited liability company into their Arizona retirement account. They paid back taxes, interest, and a $15,000 fine. Floyd called me once 3 days before sentencing, his voice shaking with rage, and said I had destroyed his daughter's life. I told him his daughter had destroyed her own life the moment she put her hands on me, and I hung up. He did not call again. On December 20th, I sat in the Cook County Courthouse on the 4th floor and watched Judge Eleanor Strand, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and a calm, precise voice, bring her gavel down twice. Once for Brent, once for Roxanne. The sound echoed in the high-ceilinged room, final and absolute. Outside, snow was falling. Thick, heavy flakes that covered the courthouse steps and clung to the bare trees along the sidewalk and turned the city white. I stood on the top step, my hand on the cold iron railing, watching the blanket grow, and I remembered the first winter I poured concrete. 1976. I was 23 years old. We had to tent the entire site and run propane heaters all night to keep the mix from freezing. My hands were raw. My back ached. But in the morning, when we pulled the forms away, the foundation was solid. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind and walked to my car. The snow turned the city quiet, muffled, peaceful. And I drove home alone. The house was silent when I unlocked the front door. But for the first time in 18 months, it was not the silence of waiting. It was not the silence of pretending I did not know what my son was doing, or the silence of building evidence while he thought me too old and trusting to notice. It was simply peace. I hung my coat in the hall closet. The snow from the courthouse steps had melted on my shoulders during the drive, leaving dark spots on the wool. I stood in the entryway and listened. The furnace hummed. The refrigerator clicked on in the kitchen. Outside, a car passed on the street, tires hissing on wet pavement. Ordinary sounds. No footsteps upstairs, no voices in the study, no one plotting in the next room. For 18 months, I had played a role. The oblivious father. The elderly man whose memory might be slipping, whose trust could be exploited, whose weakness invited attack. I had let Brent see what he wanted to see, a victim. Every confused question, every moment of hesitation, every time I asked him to explain something I already understood perfectly, it was theater. And now the curtain had come down, the audience had gone home, and I could stop pretending. I walked through the study, where the safe sat empty of the fake documents Lester and I had created. Past the dining table where my son had struck me on Easter Sunday, the spot where I fell still visible as a faint scuff on the hardwood. Into the hallway past photographs of better years. And finally, to my wife's bedroom, the door I had left closed since the funeral. I opened it. The afternoon light came through the lace curtains she had chosen years ago, casting patterns on the carpet. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The bed made with hospital corners. The closet door half open. The vanity where she sat every morning to put on her earrings and check her lipstick before leaving for the office. I reached into my breast pocket and withdrew her watch. The delicate gold band caught the light. I had worn it through the board meeting, through the arrests, through the sentencing. Feeling her with me. Feeling the weight of what we had built together and what I was fighting to protect. I set the watch on the vanity exactly where it belonged, next to her perfume bottle and the small wooden box that held her wedding ring. "It is finished," I said to the empty room. "You can rest now." I touched the edge of the vanity, running my fingers over the smooth wood. I kept my promise. The foundation held. On the wall above, the vanity hung our wedding photograph. 1974. She wore white. I wore a suit I had bought with my first real paycheck. We were 21 years old, and we thought we understood the world. We did not. But we learned together. "So I did what you taught me," I said to her face in the photograph. "I understood the whole structure before I made the cut, just like you showed me with the roses. Cut too early, the plant dies. Cut too late, the disease spreads. But cut at the right time in the right place, and what remains can heal." The watch sat on the vanity, and the beam slotted into place. The structure was complete. The building could stand on its own now. 2 days later, on the morning of December 22nd, I met privately with Stuart Fulton and Ellis Vincent in my office. Stuart sat in the chair across from my desk, his hands folded in his lap, looking older than his 55 years. Ellis stood by the window, young and straight-backed, 24 years old, with dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Stuart," I said, "you stayed silent too long, old friend. You saw the irregularities. You knew something was wrong. But you said nothing for months while my son stole from this company and put his hands on me." Stuart's face went pale. "Vernon and I, but you put up that camera," I continued. "In the end, when it mattered most, you found the courage to act. You installed the security system that captured the evidence we needed. That was courage in your own way. Fear does not make you a bad man, Stuart. It makes you human." He exhaled, his shoulders dropping. Thank you. Your position is secure, I said. Your pension is intact. You have been with this company for 33 years, and you will retire with dignity when you are ready. I turned to Ellis. The young man met my eyes without flinching. You were the first with spine to speak truth. You came to me when you saw the discrepancies in the quarterly reports. You did not wait. You did not calculate the risk to your career. You simply did what was right. This company needs men like you, Ellis. Thank you, sir, he said, because you cooperated fully and testified against Brent. The district attorney's office has already granted you immunity from prosecution, I said. You are promoted to senior accounting clerk effective immediately, 20% raise, and when you finish your degree next spring, we will talk about a position in management. Ellis nodded, then glanced at Stewart, then back at me. Sir, may I ask you something? Go ahead. How can you forgive him for waiting so long when you were in danger? He gestured toward Stewart. You are giving him security and retirement, but your son is in prison for 5 years. How do you decide who deserves mercy and who deserves punishment? I leaned back in my chair and looked at the young man. His face was unlined, untested, certain. How do you explain to someone who has never faced real fear that silence born of weakness is different from silence born of greed? How do you tell someone who sees the world in black and white that most of life is gray? Stewart was afraid, I said. Brent was ambitious. Stewart stayed quiet to protect his job. Brent stayed quiet to steal mine. Do you see the difference? Ellis frowned. Fear is still cowardice. Is it? I asked. Have you ever had to choose between doing what is right and keeping food on your family's table? Have you ever watched someone more powerful than you do something wrong and calculated the cost of speaking up? The young man said nothing. I studied his face and saw myself at 24. Certain, confident, sure of right and wrong. The kid would understand when his own time came to choose between what was right and what was safe, and discovered they were not always the same thing. The oak dining table seated 12. On Christmas Day, I sat alone at the head with a single plate, a glass of Cabernet, and no sense of defeat whatsoever. I had let Ellis go without answering his question. Some lessons cannot be taught. They must be lived, discovered in the moment when fear and principle collide, and you learn which one you truly serve. The kid would figure it out eventually. Or he would not. Either way, it was his path to walk. Tonight I sat at the table I built with my own hands, eating roasted chicken and green beans. I had prepared myself drinking wine my wife and I bought in Napa in 2008. The house was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, no waiting for the next lie or the next theft. Just peace. I looked at the 11 empty chairs. I remembered the Christmases when they were full, Brent at my right hand, Lester and his family, Wade and his wife, employees who had become friends over decades of building together. Laughter, stories, the smell of my wife's pecan pie filling every room. Those memories were real. No forgery, no embezzlement, no violence could erase them. They belonged to me. You were real once, I said to the empty chairs. Before the greed, those years are still mine. I ate slowly. The chicken was good seasoned, the way my wife taught me. Outside, snow fell again, covering the city in white. And I realized something. This was not loneliness. This was the first honest moment I had experienced in 18 months. No pretending to be confused. No performing weakness to maintain the trap. Just me, free to be exactly who I was. The empty chairs were not ghosts. They were cleared space ready for whoever earned the right to sit there next. I raised my glass. To foundations that hold. I said, even when everything else collapses. I smiled for the first time in months. 3 days later, I sat in the conference room at Ashford and Sons with Lester and Margaret Yates interviewing scholarship applicants for the new trade program. 63 applications, 12 slots available. Alyssa Brennan, 20 years old. Steady green eyes answered my question about load-bearing walls with precision that impressed even Margaret. She would get her scholarship. Then Marcus Deshawn entered. 19, South Side. No father in the picture. 2 years of construction cleanup work. He wore dress pants and a white button-down that looked newly bought. When he shook my hand, his palm was rough and calloused the hands of someone who genuinely worked. "Tell me why you want this scholarship," I said. He looked at me directly. "I want to build houses. Good ones. Strong ones. I want to build my own house one day with my own hands, and know it will stand for 50 years. There was real hunger in his face. Not for money or status, for knowledge, for skill, for the satisfaction of making something permanent. It was the hunger Brent never had. "Now, we start with the foundation," I told him. "Everything else depends on that." Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notebook, and wrote down exactly what I said, his hand moving carefully across the page in neat capital letters. I watched him write, and I felt something I thought was dead. Not hope exactly, but its close cousin. Possibility. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what someone else picks up and carries forward. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. I sat in the garden my wife planted 20 years ago, holding a glass of cheap Cabernet, watching my breath cloud beneath the stars. Marcus got his scholarship. All 12 slots were filled by the afternoon of December 30th. Alyssa Brennan, Colin Torres, and 10 others with calloused hands and hungry eyes. The first class would begin in February. Stewart coordinated with the instructors. Ellis managed the paperwork. The foundation my wife and I built was growing in new directions toward people who would carry it forward with care. I sat on the wooden bench I installed in 1998, back when my knees did not ache in the cold. The garden stood dormant, now skeletal branches, frozen earth. My wife used to walk these paths every morning, checking on her roses, her hydrangeas, her beloved peonies. She knew exactly when to prune, when to cut, when to let things grow wild. "Understand the whole structure before you make the cut," she told me once, kneeling beside a rose bush with her shears. My wife taught me that pruning is an act of love, not destruction. What I did to my family was no different. I cut because I had to. Because leaving the disease in place would have killed everything she and I built together. It took me 18 months, and the destruction of my family, to finally understand those words. People will say I lost everything. Poor Vernon Ashford lost his son, lost everything he worked for. But they are wrong. I only lost what I mistakenly believed I owned. My son never belonged to me. He belonged to his own choices, the greed, the violence, the calculated betrayal. Those choices were his to make, not mine to prevent. You cannot build character for someone else. No matter how solid the foundation you pour, no matter how many lessons you teach or values you model. In the end, every person chooses who they become. Brent chose, and I chose to stop him. I thought about the last 18 months. Easter dinner when my son threw his phone at my head and I fell bleeding on my own floor. The moment I discovered the embezzlement through a simple lie about a restaurant receipt. The decision to build evidence quietly instead of confronting him. The security cameras, the board meeting, the arrests, every step calculated, every move deliberate. The phone Brent threw at me ended my family. But that same phone saved my life's work. The texts, the emails, the proof of conspiracy, all of it locked in the device they used as a weapon. Sometimes the weapon meant to bury you is the only thing that digs you out. I raised my glass to the winter sky. I am not alone. I have hands that still know how to build. I have the truth. I have 12 young people who will learn a trade that can feed their families and give them pride. I have employees whose pensions are protected. I have a company that will fund a sanctuary and scholarships for kids like Marcus. At 70, that is enough. The garden around me was stripped bare branches, black against the dark sky. But the roots were alive beneath the frozen ground, dormant, waiting for spring. Just like me, I stood, picked up the empty glass, and walked toward the house. I have been a builder my entire life. Houses, companies, families. And I learned this: the most durable structures are never the ones we pour concrete for. They are the ones we build on truth. And to you listening to my story, remember this: justice is not about rage. It is about evidence and patience. Looking back, I wish I had raised a son who understood the value of hard work instead of the shortcuts to wealth. I made mistakes as a father. Perhaps I gave him too much too soon. Perhaps I confused providing security with teaching character. But when the moment came to choose between protecting my pride and protecting my life's work, I chose truth. And I chose it methodically. If you are facing family justice issues, if someone you love has turned against you, do not rush. Document everything. Build your case carefully. Family justice is not won in moments of anger. It is won in silent preparation. Dad's revenge stories, like mine, are not about cruelty. They are about accountability. I believe God gave me the clarity to see the path forward when I was bleeding on my floor. These Dad's revenge stories teach us that family justice requires both strength and strategy. Truth as your weapon, patience as your shield. So I ask you, was I right to build my trap instead of confronting him immediately? Leave your honest answer in the comments. I read them all. If this story moved you or made you think, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Wise Revenge. You are not alone in these struggles. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time matters to me. One final note: while some details have been adjusted for storytelling and privacy, the core lesson, the message about patience, evidence, and choosing truth that is real and worth remembering,